Today on the Men at the Movies podcast, we're going to discuss the 2014 movie Fury. We're going to look at the painful process of initiation, how difficult it is to find the narrow path between brutality and beauty, and how we only discover our identity through surrender. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from Kentucky is Laurence Coppedge. How you doing, Laurence?
I'm doing great, Paul. How are you today?
Good. I got a little junk in my throat. The air is yellow down here in North Carolina these days. I don't know. You guys have a lot of pollen and allergy stuff up there?
We do. The yellow bomb has dropped on us as well. So.
Yeah, my black truck has turned mostly greenish yellow.
It's the season.
So we're here today. We're going to talk about the movie Fury, which, if you haven't seen it, one, you should. But the other is, as I watched it, there was a lot of language. So I just wanted to warn our listeners, because I don't know what's going to happen. We're open to how the Spirit moves us. But this is probably, if you listen with kids, this may not be a podcast that you want to listen with them. I'll put it that way. We'll probably enter into some rough stuff because, as we see in the movie, war is a pretty rough time. It's ugly. There, as he says, what is it? Ideals are peaceful, and but history is violent. And so we enter into some of the violence. Before that, because when I got introduced to Laurence, and I think we were sort of loosely connected, but then we actually made a connection, and you sent me Fury, and I was like, oh man, that's on the list. And so my question for you, Laurence, is when I sent you the invite, why did you pick this movie?
You know, I love the context. So World War II has been a big part of my family story. And so the historical kind of fiction side just drew me in, but the story itself and the brutality and life that's in it just kind of drew me in. It just was an incredibly entertaining and kind of focusing story for me.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of those themes. And it's interesting you talk about both the brutality and the sort of the vitality, the life that's in it, because we don't normally put those two concepts together.
No, we don't. And it's a real life kind of concept, right? So, you know, a lot of stories you'll have the dark side and then they come back in and, you know, you have the victory at the end. And this one, you know, the end, you're just kind of left with an ache. And yeah. That relates to how I feel sometimes in my own life.
I know, right?
So, this is an honest ending, I think. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. And we don't normally talk about the ending at the beginning, but I think that he goes through this, and Norman is the key character of the story. And he goes through this, and he's at the end, and he gets rescued. Again, we do spoilers. We're talking about movies, so don't come expecting not to hear what happens in the movie. But he gets rescued, and they're putting him in the truck. And the medic is like, "You're a hero, man. You're a hero." And that's not what's crossing Norman's mind at all.
He just gives him 1,000-mile stare and then just walks away. And again, our stories have these parts, right? It's not the end and maybe not the beginning, but it reflects something honest and real that's just beautiful after you get through it. It's tough as nails when you're in it, right, Paul?
Right. So we'll go to the beginning. You know, one of the things that I wrote down that I heard John Eldredge say in a podcast from a couple weeks ago, but that the war is fiercest at the end. And in this movie, you know, in John Eldredge, he'd been talking about Iwo Jima and the Southern Pacific and how just brutal those battles were. And you see that here of you're pulling out all the stops. You know, you've got kids in uniform and they're doing everything. And it made me think of even in sports, You know, if you've got the NBA finals, that game 4, that closeout game, that's the toughest to win. If I'm playing pickup basketball, that last point is the toughest to make. You're going to get fouled every time you get a shot.
That's right. It's a little more violent at that point. You know, as you're talking, Paul, it reminds me, there was a quote as one of the tank commanders, name is Don, and we'll introduce him as we go, but he's reporting to his, I think it was lieutenant above him, or must have been a colonel. And the colonel says, man, why are they fighting so hard? Well, this is absolutely insane. And they get this knowing look, and Don says to him, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And it's just a sobering, like, of course you would. This is your homeland. It gives context in the greater story. So
yeah, and I thought that was interesting because I've seen that theme and almost that line exactly pop up in a couple different movies. In Gladiator, at the very beginning when they're fighting, there's like, why don't they just give up? And they look at each other like, would you? Because and we've talked a few times on this podcast about failure is just giving up.
Right.
And, and again, we nailed this one pretty hard, is in this life you will have trouble.
That's right.
But take heart, don't give up, endure. There's a lot of patience and perseverance, to use the Bible word there. And it's just enduring to the end, so that at the end, like Norman, you can stand.
Yes.
And it's just about sometimes just making it through the ugly battles of our lives.
That's right. And I guess I took us to the end, but, I might drag us back to the beginning and maybe speak to just, as we met Norman, it comes right in, fairly early in the story, where you have an experienced tank crew that has lost a beloved brother, and they've been through North Africa and Sicily, and then, they're into Europe and D-Day. And then here they are in the motherland, and they lost their brother. And then this young punk gets thrown onto the tank. And so what do you remember about that kind of opening scene with Norman here, Paul?
Oh my goodness. You mentioned Don, the sergeant, war daddy, played by Brad Pitt, and man, phenomenal character.
Absolutely.
Just so nuanced. And I remember, so Norman comes up. The tank crew, they come back, as you mentioned, they lost their brother, and they're dirty, they're grimy. And Norman comes up with a clean white face, like shining in the dark, in the grime. And Don is looking at Norman, and he's like, no, you're not my replacement. And Norman doesn't want to be there. He's like, I'm a typist. I'm a clerk. They train me to type 60 words a minute. I don't want to be here. But what I see in Don's face as he looks at Norman is, this guy's going to die. And I don't want to go through this pain with I don't want to put in the effort of somebody that I know is going to just die.
That's right. His quote was something like, I just lost the best gunner in all the Second Army, and I got you. Pretty low bar to start with for Norman.
I had the best bow gunner in the entire Ninth Army in that seat. And now I got you. I promised my crew a long time ago I'd keep them alive. You're getting in the way of that.
I'm sorry. Okay, I am trained to type 60 words a minute. I am not trained to machine gun dead bodies. I am trying my very best.
Norman, come here. Come on, son. You are no damn good to me unless you can kill crowds. Put a big fat hole in his back. Put a big fat hole in his back.
No.
Why the hell not?
It's not right.
Not right. We're not here for right and wrong. We're here to kill them. Why are you here? You're here to kill him. You know why he's here? He's here to kill you. He's here to kill you, Norman. He's here to rip your throat out and pull in your... Try and teach you something. You here to get me killed? You gonna get me killed?
No.
I need you to perform. Just get it over with. Just get it over with.
I can't do it.
Yes, you can. I know you can. He kills you, or you kill him. Simple math. You or him. Pick.
Just
Come
kill
here.
me. Kill me. Kill me. Kill me. Kill me. Please. I can't do it.
We get a little mythic here because God isn't asking us to kill somebody. But at the same time, if you approach it through that perspective, what you see is Don is preparing Norman to do his job. Like he's here to kill you. If he had the chance, he would kill you. And that's the warfare, the battle that we're in and God's trying to say, hey, and I think many new believers come to faith thinking life is good and everything's going to be great and I'm going to get a new job and my family, my kids are going to be awesome and my marriage is going to be saved. And sometimes that doesn't work out.
Yeah. As you're talking, just even feeling the impact of the clip, and it's just painful, right? I mean, here we are, we've got a young man that, like all of us, right? We start out, if you don't have ideals, it's hard to find the road in life, right? And so here he is, just literally clean face, kind of fresh in the tank. And then we have what is a father figure literally hurting this kid. I mean, he is getting crushed and smashed,
yeah.
And he's getting wrestled to the ground. And it is both initiation and fathering and brutal to what he is holding dear. You get the sense that this isn't right, is what he says, right. Norman says. And the reality of the war has to actually crush that ideal. And it's a painful moment. It reminds me of, is it the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where, you kind of have Eustace is the dragon,
yeah.
and to shed that, the skin of the young man, it's very painful. And this is what's happening to Norman. And you just feel for him, but you know where they're headed. And it's like a paradox of just pain and training and these kind of opposing things that actually relate pretty well to real life too. So.
Yeah. Because in that moment, I felt myself get a little choked up when you hear his voice of kill me, kill me, kill me. I can't do it. And you see that when he kind of loses his shit in the tank, where he's like, they're dead. And there's like, you're no doctor, shoot them, shoot those bodies on the ground because they might not be dead. And they know that, but his innocence, his sensitivity won't allow, he's like, this is not what I said. And he's just, and that's the only way to describe it is he loses his shit in the tank and he's like, I can't do that. And Don's like, if you're going to bawl, turn off your communicator.
That's right.
But we all get to that point.
We do.
And we fight with Father and we say, I can't, Jesus did. I can't do this. Take this cup from me. And at the end, and that's what Jesus said. Anyone who wants to follow me must give up their life. They have to die. You have to die to yourself in order to live and become the man that God had in mind when he created us.
That's right.
But that false self, that the thing that we thought we were, has to die.
That's right. Paul, as you're talking, I just reflect on my own story, and I think of, starting out as a young man and looking into entrepreneurial and kingdom-minded things. And, in my case, I had a really big vision that in what I said was that I'm going to risk enough. If God doesn't show up, I'm toast.
Yeah.
And, and it's interesting. And again, the career path doesn't matter, but the heart and the ideals do. And, here I am in middle age, having been through in the last 20 years, a painful stripping of those ideals. It was kingdom, it was love, it was good business. It was a lot of things that I maybe cut and pasted from other places that were not my own. And I find myself now, I'm right in the middle of a meltdown in some ways. And thank God, because, I don't actually have to live out those early ideals in the same way. And, I'm learning other skills. And it's this, I really identify with Norman in this because, I mean, some might look at what my story is and say, man, this is a pancake. And then in reality, man, I have way less ideals, but I'm finding kind of in the cadence of just walking out of this mess of my kingdom vision and finding God on that path. And I do relate to Norman. It's this, there's a harsh side of what I've had to face. And then somewhere in there are the ideals that need to stick.
Right.
And of course on a podcast, we're going to say, oh yeah, I have it all figured out. Well, actually, I don't know, right? I don't know which ideals will stick. God is good and he loves me. That's all I know. And there's other good stuff, but it's this kind of place that I just saw in Norman where you see the wheels turning in his brain, you see the pain kind of coming from all sides. And it makes me just sort of long for one, I want an answer of what it all is, but in reality, it makes me a little more okay with that painful journey because it really does hurt. It's not like I'm not writing greeting cards of my story. It's pretty bloody.
Right.
And man, I like my life a whole lot better now than I did. And somehow there's grace in that. And God is with me here like he was at the beginning. So,
and I think as you're talking, like Don was willing to be hated. Yes. He was willing to bear the anger of Norman. I mean, and in that scene after that, Don wrestles Norman to the ground, puts his hand on the pistol and shoots the German.
Yes.
And he walks away. He's like, do your job. And Norman's pissed. He feels broken. He just lays on the ground kind of crying. But the interesting thing, his crew, which to that point had sort of ostracized him, had kept him at a distance, welcomed him in. They poured him some coffee. They had him, they said, there's a reason. We love this dude. He's kept us alive. And then Don walks by. He's like, all right, we're going to leave in 15 minutes. And he said, Norman, I haven't seen you eat anything all day. Get something to eat.
That's it.
And Norman and they said, you better eat something and you better make sure he sees it.
That's right.
Because even though it looked in appearance as hate, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're not measuring up, do your job. It's this tough, difficult nurturing.
That's right. Yeah, there's a kindness in the brutality, and in the movie, it's like the only safe place in the entire place is inside that little tank.
Yeah.
And and obviously because of whatever 2.5 inches of metal, but also then, which isn't even safe. But yeah, you begin to get the sinew of the care of. He's called War Daddy is what Don's name is, which is funny. And in reality, like that's what is beginning to happen. And so you see this food and it's interesting. You actually see touch in a way that maybe most dudes wouldn't do in normal life, but in that setting, that is real. It's legitimate. It's this brutality where your brain cannot even function. And then there's a hand from War Daddy on your shoulder. And somehow they're settling down and he walks them off the cliffs and then he goes to throw up himself when he can't pull it together, it's like this progression of care that that's not a war movie term, but in reality, that's the Father. I would say the same for me. It's like, I can point to these moments in the middle of my own, struggle fire here that I've been walking through. And it is like, oh my gosh, there he was.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there he is. And, I'm too mad and pissed and hurt to really get it, but I can see it now in ways that, again, I'll never unsee that in my entire life. I'm marked forever. And obviously we're talking about a movie here, but you see that development in Norman, there's a little deposit of tenderness and kindness that's kind of placed on top of this bloody mess.
When you mentioned War Daddy, it made me, in the Bible, there's two things. One, God is the Lord of angel armies, the Lord Almighty. The Lord is a warrior. And he's also daddy, right? He's the father.
That's right.
And it's as we mentioned, you know, we've got brutality and vitality. We've got the crushing, and we'll talk here in a minute about the beauty. We've got the brutal wrestling and shooting, doing something that feels like death, to patting him on the shoulder and say, get something to eat. And Norman can't grasp it. He's like, this doesn't make sense.
I can't.
No. And by the way, if you think you shouldn't be angry at God, go read some Psalms.
Exactly.
Because,
absolutely okay.
Yeah, he can take it. And it's better to be yelling at God, because then it's a relationship. You're engaging, you're turning to the right person. It's not turning to drink or drugs or sex or work or whatever. You're pouring out your anger in the right direction, because he can take it, and just like sort of a forging, he'll take that heat and forge a weapon out of it.
That's right.
So we go, and Norman, his face is starting to get dirty along the way, but they go to this village, and they sort of take out this village, and they're given a few hours to relax. And there's debauchery going on, but it's interesting because once again, Don takes Norman up. They see this apartment, and I think he actually thinks that there's somebody hiding in there, and there's these two women. And again, we're not talking about the morality here of the situation, but what Don does, and Norman's still pissed. He's still angry. He's still, what do you want me to do? Why are you doing this? Trying to buddy. It's almost like he thinks he's doing good cop, bad cop. But what happens in the apartment there, the girl's apartment, is Norman gets reminded of beauty. You know, first the brutality and then the beauty. You know, he's playing the piano, which invites the one girl over there, and then they get romance, and even Don gets cleaned up, which I think, you know, now he has a clean face, and he and Norman are different from the rest of the crew, who still are animals, and he describes them as animals. All you understand is the fist and the boot. But he enters into beauty in the war. And once you brought it up, now I can't unsee this. As you mentioned, the brutality and the vitality. You got the brutality of killing the German, and now you've got the beauty of music and romance and love.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of dichotomy. And then you have, you know, one of the tank crew comes in, Grady, and just absolutely desecrates the moment.
Yeah, that's a good word.
It's kind of almost, you know, you're just cringing because of it. And then War Daddy reclaims the space. You can't take this from me. And, you know, and thus he protects Norman. You can't take this from him. And then they leave, and, you know, things change a bit as well. That's a pretty dramatic turn, I think.
Yeah. That, again, you get introduced into beauty and grace, and then as they're getting ready to leave, a shell comes in and takes out the girl's apartment. And Norman, again, loses his shit. He goes running out, and that same guy goes and chases. Are you Jesus? Are you going to raise her from the dead? Because they've seen it. They are, in a lot of ways, they become his mentors in the moment, because they know what it's like to lose something.
That's right.
And that's what our enemy does. Remember, he's here to steal, kill, and destroy. So if there's grace, if there's joy, if there's beauty, if there's love, he's coming after it, especially after.
Yes.
Because he's like, oh, that wasn't real. That I just took away the one thing of beauty that you found.
Yes.
And how are we going to respond to that?
Oh my gosh. It's, you know, and then, you know, in the shelling, it's like Grady, our rough disturber of beauty, so to speak, comes to actually pull his brother off the rubble. And it's its own beauty from the aggressor of 5 minutes ago.
Right.
To then, you know, and he's screaming at him, and he's basically saying, you know, it's called war. You feel it? You know, it's this kind of a rage. And then, you know, he takes Norman by almost the neck, to get him out of there. But in that even is a sense of there's a care for the kid.
Right.
It was rough. It was bloody even, but it was still kind of part of that growing sinew of the team's kind of bond. So,
and it's initiating, because they had been through that initiation. They had seen beauty lost.
yes.
And they walked with him through it. And because Norman he was like wailing on him.
Yeah.
And never once did he hit him back.
No,
He just kind of wrapped him up, said, come on, we got to go.
That's right.
We got another mission, got another war to fight.
That's right.
And as they're driving out of town, Norman's up on the tank with Don, and Don's sitting there as looking at his tear-streaked face, and just you can see him wanting to reach out, wanting to comfort him. And I think he gives him a reminder of what's actually happening.
That's an entire city on fire. I started this war killing Germans in Africa, then France, then Belgium. Now I'm killing Germans in Germany. It will end soon. But before it does, a lot more people gotta die.
That's a whole city on fire. And he says that's what war looks like. That's what war is. And I don't know if you watch the news, that's a world on fire. You can't turn on the news without some trauma happening, somebody getting killed, some people getting upset, people who are feeling less than, people who are feeling frustrated, not honored, anger. There's more people in slavery today than at any time in history. The sex trafficking trade, you name it, and the world is on fire. And I think God is saying, hey, we started here. Because remember, Jesus coming was like the invasions of Normandy. Right. He's like, oh, we're taking authority back. But it's not an instant snap your fingers. It's a process.
That's right. Trauma. I was a young man. I lost someone in my life really early, and actually my father while I was in college. And my pastor, my mentor, my friend at the time kind of looked me in the face and he said, Laurence, in a time of pain, grief, and trauma, watch very closely what you align yourself with, because you will become fused to it.
Wow.
Especially right now. And it was this kind of a life-changing moment. And as we reflect on the story, it's like, okay, now in this part of the story, we have everybody's fresh on the trauma. And it's interesting, they each take a different approach to be okay. And you mentioned this earlier, but do we drink in trauma? Do we go to sex or other kind of addictions? And it's an interesting question. How do we tend those places? Because you're super vulnerable.
Right.
And, in this story, we see a number of things from that. They'll basically have the anger that's just uncontrollable. They'll shut down. But what we see in the story is this kind of bonding together in trauma. And it brings that, one of the things I think many of us long for is that just brotherhood or even sisterhood of kind of just connection and the deep grounding. And, it's why these guys still if they're in their 90s, they still know where their brothers are. And, it's the war intimacy. And I'm not a military veteran. I can't even begin to identify with that because it's just not fair. However, in my own life, it's those things where, okay, these people were with me in this moment. It meant something to this traumatized place in me. And that got me through. And in some ways, that's a fusing of something that's appropriate and proper and wholesome, even though we're all cutting up and having, we're messing with each other. But we hear pretty quickly after that, they're going to the battle with the Tiger tank that comes up. And, that whole moniker of, they basically say together after this battle, best job I ever had. And that's a way to kind of bring them together. It's, oh my goodness, we're traumatized. We can't think straight, but we're going to face each other and join together. It's actually beautiful. And it's a good tactic. It's a good thing to lean into. And, I know for myself, it's like, okay, in these times, how do I just literally get on my face and find God and find Jesus in that pain and not go to the addictions that I would rather go to? It's easier, and it's there's a joy in that connection.
Radio's 86. We're on our own. Good shot.
Oh, that wasn't me. No, I'm the instrument, not the hand. God didn't call us today. You hear me, boys?
What's he doing up there? Big paradise. Everyone else came up, snake guys, but us.
Lord's protection.
We got it, don't we, boy?
Yes, sir.
We got it, sir. Norm mowed them down, didn't he, too?
Hey, good job, Norm.
Welcome to the Army, Norm. You did good. Best job ever. Best job ever. Best job ever.
Best job ever.
And in that battle, there was 3 tanks going into that battle, and 2 of them were taken out. And they were friends. They were partners. They were their brothers, right? They weren't their immediate brothers, but they knew them. They had been going through war. They'd been part of their division. And this Tiger, the tank, the German tank, was superior in armor and shells. I don't know how the Allies won with this amazing tank. And they were able to get behind it and shoot it and finally find the weak spot. Just like any video game, you have to aim for the weak spot of the boss. And they're sitting there. They could have died. And then, like you said, it wasn't our time. We had the Lord's protection today. And Norman, who not that long ago in terms of the movie, that was his voice at the end. Best job I ever had. Because when you go through battle with your brothers, and whatever battle might look like, and every man faces battles, and some of them, and I think the enemy specifically targets who we are in those battles. So for someone, it could be a battle with alcohol. It could be a battle with sex and with women. It could be loss of your father, loss of your marriage. It could be your kids go off the rails. It could be loss of your kids. The enemy targets us because he knows us. He knows what we could be and fears it, as John says in Waking the Dead. And so, but those guys who go with us, who are with us in those moments, when we're just sitting there, we don't have anything to say. You just sit and you're like, this sucks. Even sitting there angry at God, and just kind of like Grady was when he was getting Norman back. He's like, come on, we got another mission. Come on. You're not going to raise her. Come on. This is war. And he's right there. And he's the one saying, hell of a shot. You mowed those, you mowed those guys down.
That's right.
And immediately he's welcome to war.
At the very end of that quote too, it's like you hear everybody else knows the cadence, right? Grady, I think he leads that. And then Norman is the last, and he says it once kind of quietly. And then you hear it again. It's like he's beginning to own his place there as a team member, as the gunner that he needs to be. And it's, and then they begin at that point in the movie to welcome him in and begin to kind of treat him as an equal. And he's still the younger guy, but it's working, so to speak. War Daddy's plan is working. And
it does take a certain amount of vulnerability from the crew, because they have to be receptive, because one, he's not replacing the brother they lost, but at the same time, they have to be willing to open themselves up to hurt again, because the possibility, this is war. The possibility is that they will die. And just another spoiler alert, that's all of our stories. We will all die at some point. It's not an if, but a when.
That's right, Paul. And maybe saying it just a little differently, if you take it around the clock, you've got from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock on that front right portion of the tank. They couldn't actually depend on him. They were actually vulnerable in that slot, actually in the tank. And yes, it is, they're going into battle with a non-functional wheel, so to speak.
Right.
And that took a lot of grace for them to even allow to happen. And then, oh my, okay, this portion of the ship wakes up, he's now online. And, that's another way to think of it, that I do. It's like, where am I online? Where am I offline? How do you stay connected, even in the worst of the worst or the best of the best? I almost find it's harder to stay connected in the good times because you're not in pain and, you're not in those, desperate kind of places. And here he is just kind of plugging in, and they now become a unit, which is cool to see.
Right. And then I hadn't thought of that, of how, that front quadrant was vulnerable. They were incomplete without him. And even with him, to a certain degree, they were incomplete. But just as Norman couldn't live without the tank crew couldn't live without a fully functioning Norman.
That's right.
And I wish I could remember. I do this all the time. I remember these stories or quotes, and I don't remember where it came from. But it talked about how when you have two people, you think of, well, we're a close, tight-knit group. Just, me, like if it's me and you, we're getting together, we're drinking coffee every week, or you're up in Kentucky, so we're drinking bourbon every week. Mm-hmm. And we invite a third guy in. We might say, well, I'm not sure about this, but the truth is that I don't know you as well without that third person, mm-hmm. because he brings out something in you that I don't. That's like right. I started having coffee with, I had coffee with one of my friends, and then another guy came in and we started doing it. They're both computer software engineer type things. And so there were times when they were talking software stuff, and I'm just like, all right, I'm looking at the menu, I'm checking my phone because I have no idea what you guys are saying. But there's a part of Patrick that I don't know without John being there. There's a part of John that I wouldn't know without Patrick being there. There's a part of me they don't know without either one of them there. This small, almost a tank crew size unit, 4 or 5 guys, mm-hmm. you bring out things in each other that enable you to be more fully known and ultimately more wholehearted.
Right. That's it. And it's the, it's an interesting place where you're sitting in a circle and it's like, okay, these guys maybe even at coffee, but in the tank, like they're living in what John Eldredge calls the larger story. And so it's a greater context from which then to live. And you're not just getting together for coffee, or they're not just getting together to hang out in a tank, although that might be fun.
That does have a certain appeal. Well,
maybe not in war. Let's be real. I'm not a veteran. I can't speak to that. In fact, it's probably its own form of hell, actually.
Yeah.
And you saw that on their face in the movie. They portrayed that well. But, we have a larger story that we're kind of living into, and your coffee group, is probably better equipped to actually go and face that, because you're not just there for yourselves. You're actually moving into something else. Well, in Fury, which is the name of their tank, by the way.
Yeah.
And, which we didn't say that most key detail, right? That we're halfway in and we just named. And so, they're in the greater context of a greater battle too. And it's part of why I love the movie. It's just this setting of, man, the mission is key, and they're living right into it in their broken, bloody, messed up lives in this little tin box.
Which, by the way, we're all living broken, bloody, messed up lives, right? We're all broken. We're all in the same tank together.
Exactly right.
So they get on this mission, and as he said, as Don had said, the radio's done. We're on our own, but we have a mission. And their mission was to go hold this crossroads, because in the exact term, if those troops get past you, the whole division is fucked, because it exposes their flank, and they are one tank. And that's what Don knows. He knows, this is my role. I protect the flank of the whole division. And that's you mentioned the larger story. And so they get there, they hit a mine, so the tank becomes disabled, but they're at the crossroads. So they're like, we're going to hold the crossroads. We're going to repair it. We'll go up on that hill to overwatch, whatever. They send Norm out. Hey, Norm, go look for, just go, be an observation post.
Yeah, actually, there's one point that I want to go back to, which is, as the tank mine blows up the tracks of the tank, Don War Daddy has his mission, and he basically says that the other guys revolt, and they're just like, we're not going to stay. Like, we're out. We're going to go. And before they knew he was staying, they just assumed everybody would leave. And then War Daddy kind of comes back up, jumps back on his tank, and he's like, I'm staying. I'm completing my mission.
Yeah.
And so then he actually releases them to go, and they're conflicted and they're pausing, and it's awkward. And oh my gosh, is this the breaking of the fellowship, so to speak? And here is the new green, but now initiated Norman, who's the first one that steps back up onto the tank with Don. And it's this powerful, something has been placed in him and something has been broken, and his reality is entirely different. And he makes the greater choice to go and be with his War Daddy, and go down in a way that, it really fits the ideals that actually are worth living into.
Don's statement was, it's not what I want to do, but it's what I'm going to do. Yeah. I don't want to stay here on there's a company or a division of SS soldiers coming, 200 or 300 men, the premier fighting group of German's army. And he's like, yeah, I don't want to stay, but I'm gonna, because that's the assignment I've been given. And
this is my home, he says.
Yeah, that's right. This is my home. And that's when he meets Norman, he's like, there's your new home. And I think every man has a desire we want a cause worth dying for. We may not necessarily want to die for it, but we want to have something that's worth dying for. We want, that you see honor and integrity in doing what's hard and what's right. And that's, I think, the ultimate, that's how, when we talk about bringing our strength as men, that's what it's about, is bringing our whole hearts to bear, bringing honor. It's like, you know what, if I don't do this, if I don't stand in the gap, then the people I'm supposed to protect are going to get hurt. The bigger picture, the Allied invasion may fail if I fail. And so they're sitting there, they're getting ready, they've prepped, they're sitting in the tank. War Daddy pulls out a bottle of some smooth, probably brown liquor, and they sit around,
from Kentucky,
of course, and they share. And in this case, the part I love is Norman. Norman gets his new name.
I know you had me preach. I know it. What we're doing here is a righteous act, gentlemen. You hear me, Gordo? Mm-hmm. There's a Bible verse I think about sometimes. Many times. It goes, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here am I. Send me.
Send me.
Book of Isaiah, chapter 6. Yeah, that's exactly right. Wow, you're something.
Oh, damn, son. You fighting drink a machine, ain't you?
Machine, that's it. That's his war name.
That's perfect.
I christened the machine.
Machine.
Machine!
Machine.
I love it in here. I do. Best job I ever had.
It's just powerful. You know, it's this, you can hear the Bible verse and then you hear the small voice that repeating the verse that it's Norman. He says, send me. And here he is, having been maybe torn down and then rebuilt. And again, he chose first, you know, to follow the lead, to step into that larger story. And then, you know, he gets a new name, which is just, it's awesome.
It is. And that's what, you know, in Revelation, it talks about, to the one who endures, I will give a white stone. And on that white stone is a name that no one else knows. We have a name that our daddy, right? That Father will appoint to us, and an identity that of who we are to our core. And to be known, not just for, because frequently I think our identity is how we've screwed up or how we're not good enough. You know, his identity when he got there was clerk. You know, I can type 60 words a minute. He took great pride in that. He's like, this is not what I'm here for. But through his initiation, he became a machine. And it's like, yeah. And once you bestow it, you're like, yes, that is who I am. That is who my Father calls me.
That's right. And then they move in and, you know, into the battle that's coming. And it is this, he steps into his name, right? This is part of that. He does his role. I mean, they, you know, it looked like that they mowed down a lot of folks, and, you know, they're a well-oiled machine,
right?
You know,
a tank crew, yep.
Not just him, but the rest of them. And they're in it, you know, for the long run here. Right. And they're just going to do their best to save this crossroads.
And I'd written down earlier when they had gone to rescue that group, because they had gone in, there was some infantrymen that were pinned down. A well-trained tank crew can save many lives and take out the strongholds of the enemy. And that's what you saw here at the end, is they gave their lives to something greater. They protected, they completed the mission that God gave them, the needs of their generation, as they talk about with David, of once he had done his job. Do your job, right? That's what he kept saying. And then as at the end, it's just Don and Norman in the tank as kind of the final wave of Germans is coming, and they know that they're not going to get out. And Norman says, I want to surrender. I'm scared. Like, I'm scared too. And he's like, I want to surrender. And War Daddy says, please don't. And we have that option. You know, I go back to the garden. Jesus had the option to surrender. Or I guess, who will you surrender to? What are you going to surrender to? Are you going to surrender to the will of the Father? Or are you going to surrender to fear or to hate or to comfort, convenience? You know, we want to create a life that's comfortable and easy because it's hard.
It is.
And he said, please don't. They're going to hurt you real bad. They're going to kill you real bad. It's almost like surrendering may feel like the easy way out, like the best thing to do, but it's going to be worse in the long run. But if you surrender, as Jesus calls us to surrender to him, what seems like death is actually life.
That's right. And in that vein, he says, please don't. And then Norman decides to stay. And then War Daddy provides him the way out to live. And it's interesting because he chooses first not to surrender. And then within the 5 seconds, War Daddy opens up the path to life. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
And so he does they drop a couple grenades. Norman gets out of the tank and then falls asleep in the mud. Weirdly, after they see him under the tank and he does surrender, but they don't capture him, which I may
step back a couple steps and then catch up with that point. But because as I listened, they're preparing for the battle at the crossroads, and you have a moment. We'll kind of go back in the story 10 or 12 minutes where Grady and Norman are in this kind of shed where it was a medical barn that had been deserted, and Grady, who has been maybe the biggest protagonist of Norman, looks at him as they take a moment of rest, and he says, Norman, you're a good man. We ain't, but you are. And it was this moment where, okay, he's been initiated. He's been to battle. He's been welcomed to the team. And then now he's being blessed by one of the most aggressively kind of mocking guys that had really kind of loved him, but also, giving him a hard time. And, then you move into, then they go to the battle and he's given a way out, which is, a miracle really. And then, towards the next scene is the German SS soldier looking under the tank, and he's a young man like Norman there. And I almost envision it like, the two of them see their future is very close. The next steps for both of them are going to be very different. And this SS young man sees a life, and right towards the end of his own surrender or even death, he gives this young man a chance to live. And it's a powerful scene, and I thought of it as in the context, maybe the main theme that I took out of this was just that kind of the maturing cycle of ideals and then practice. And you wonder what Norman will head back to. What's his trajectory going to be like? How will this man live? And it just makes me think of my own, the kind of the trajectory and the path. And, in my younger days of vital faith, or just being a driven bastard, or both, you kind of have these ideals. And it's like, I didn't ever say this out loud, but you look at some of the older folks and you're like, what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you doing something? And in the youth, you don't quite understand. And actually now here I am, middle-aged, and facing in now of a bit of a wreckage, and the dreams that I had hoped for didn't happen like I wanted. And I see these older ladies and men ahead of me a little differently. It's like, okay, wait a second. I'm watching for their pattern. I'm watching for their method, because they had it when I was 20. I just didn't see it. And now, as I'm 45 and looking at them in the next stage, just wondering in some ways of how they've retained the life that sustains them, how they've found God in all of these changes and all of these, the tearing down, the burning down of the ideals, and then the rebirth that happens. And, I see it differently than I did when I was 20. And, even aligning with this story, it's like you just have a longing for Norman to kind of go and make a difference. Of course, that's what we want, right? We in our kind Father's hands, we want to make a difference. That was my heart at 20. That's my heart at 45. And I will approach everything with a deeper grounding in God, or, my own, just as I grapple with that. And we don't all get it every day, right? So it's this, and, I pray that the drives and those ideals are more grounded now. And the cadences that I see from my older brothers and sisters can be just slower from me, and I can watch and learn from them. And, it's not far from how Norman has lived through this.
What you mentioned about how Grady had said, you're a good man. We ain't. But it goes back to that, what we've been talking about is the brutality, and then the beauty, and grappling with that seems like those paradoxes, those things in opposition, and holding on to those ideals that are most critical, those ideals that are most important. And as you mentioned, the grounding in the faith, and then as Paul says in Ephesians 3, grounded in the love of Christ. Because when you can walk in the love of the Father and the identity and the wholeheartedness then we do get the opportunity to stand in the gap, to be a part of that larger story. And there are days that you don't want to live through again.
Absolutely. Well, and it makes me think of, just the concept of the true self and the false self. And, again, we can go back to these moments in the film, and certainly more importantly, maybe our lives, where the false self gets fused with pain and trauma. And then we begin to live out of something that actually does not serve us well. And that's certainly much of what has been kind of shaved off of me, which is just that, I would have even called it godly in some ways, but the method and the means as a young man just did not work. And now it's like, I'm not saying it all works, but I don't think the same. I'm not the same. And I'm getting glimpses of a truer self that is grounded in the love of a kind father, is grounded in a marriage that is thriving, is grounded in a life that I love. And I didn't really like my life doing the great mission that I had chosen. It was like, I let it, God bless it. And in reality, I'm learning to actually go and listen to God's voice in a different way, and watch the older brothers and sisters to just learn, kind of find that ancient path and live into a deeper way. And it's so much better. It's so joyful. And there's glimpses of a true self. Now, I'm sure, Paul, that you've arrived at your full true self, but
Yep, I'm done. I'm complete.
That's so good. That's why I was here, because I really wanted to learn all that. But in a sense, like, to get even glimpses of it is such a gift. And then you get to live on that, and it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, Laurence, I want to thank you for your time and for picking this movie. It was one on the list that is one that I've loved, because I think it does resonate. And, man, even you've clarified even that for me, of, especially with that beauty and the brutality and wrestling with both, and man, trying to come out on the other side. Not like, I look back and it was like Norman could have held on to his clerk identity. He could have shifted and been the animal that the other guys were, but it's harder, I think, to walk that, as you mentioned, that narrow path that leads to life.
That's right. And it's so much better. It's the way,
so
the
much.
only way.
Yeah. So thank you for your time, and appreciate your time and your thoughts and your insight and sharing some of your life.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be with you.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Laurence Coppedge talking about Fury. And I hope you join us next week here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?